Good morning, and welcome to the beginning of my devlog series for the game I'll be working on. This will be an overview video where I'll talk about the general idea of the game, and subsequent videos will focus on completed milestones. The game will be a 3D action game where you play as a character with psychic powers, which you use to fight enemies with. The gameplay will revolve around using these powers to control many weapons at once. There will be two main types of weapons in the game, long range and close range. Each long range weapon has its own unique control scheme and pathing it follows when you launch them. For example, one weapon can only be launched in a straight line, so if an enemy moves out of the way, then you'll miss. But you can then relaunch it from that position to try to hit them again. The complexity of the game comes from the fact that you'll be using many weapons at once, so your attention will be split between all those weapons and all the enemies you have to fight. Even if you can relaunch a weapon, you might be too focused on another weapon or enemy to notice. Close range weapons, on the other hand, will focus more on utility and support. For example, one weapon will be a glove you can use to catch and throw projectiles that are fired at you. This can be used as a defensive tool, but it can also be used to grab your own weapons. This effectively allows you to take a long-range weapon and throw it based on the pathing control scheme of the glove's throw, rather than the weapon's own. The downside will be that you won't be able to regain control over the weapon until the weapon hits something, or it finishes traveling down its path. If you miss with a long-range weapon, you can always just relaunch from where it is, but you can't do that if it's thrown using a close-range weapon. Players will have to be careful when using weapons in this way. As the game goes on, players will find new weapons they can equip, as well as items that can be attached to those weapons to improve them. These items will be limited, so you'll have to think about which weapons should use which items, and how many of each. This will be especially important for rare items. Those will give more unique benefits, and those benefits will be different for each weapon. For example, there will be one weapon that makes loops as it flies. If another weapon flies through those loops, they will get a boost to their power and speed, where the more complete the loop, the stronger the effect. What you can do is attach an item that gives a trailing effect to this weapon, and it will cause the trailing loop to also give this benefit. The weapon's own loop will still disappear, but the trail will stay for a bit longer and gives a smaller boost to weapons that fly through them. There will be these types of item-weapon combinations that will make using the weapon easier. However, because these items are limited in number, using them to raise a weapon's skill floor will be at the expense of not using them to raise another's skill ceiling. For the looping weapon, if you could just improve your timing, there will be little use in the trailing item if you're only using it to keep loops alive for longer. The trailing loop is weaker anyways, so it's not as if this makes the weapon stronger in the first place. Instead, it might be better to attach the item to a weapon that will make it stronger. That being said, if your plan is to use the item so you don't need to focus on that weapon as much, and instead get better at using other weapons, then you might be fine with using it like this. There will be other game mechanics the player will engage with, but these are the main ones. Players will need to really understand the game's mechanics to beat it, so the game will be fairly challenging. To account for lesser skilled players, besides what I've already mentioned about weapon attachments, the game will have two difficulty options. The first will be the game's intended difficulty, while the second will cut straight to credits. For the game's art, I'll be going for a cartoon art style. I have some ideas on how the game will look and its style, but mostly vague ideas right now. I'm thinking of going for something along the lines of an Invader Zim character design right now. For the story, it'll be a SpongeBob kind of story. Early SpongeBob, obviously, where the main character has a somewhat absurd way of viewing the world, and acts upon that worldview seriously, while other characters have various levels of common sense. An example is how the main character has a particular preference to what he will use his psychic powers on, and he'll act as if he can't use those powers on anything else. Not that he'll bring up that fact, he just won't do it for some reason. I won't be modeling the story off of SpongeBob, of course. I just think it's the closest comedy story to what I have in mind, and what I assume is more familiar to most. The Gintama anime has a similar style of humor to that. For now, my main focus will be on gameplay mechanics since they're the most important, and I'll be getting back to story and art later. My development process will be starting with making systems for the weapons, before moving on to character and enemies. Once that's done, I'll come back to art and finish with level design and the game's overall structure and progression. If any of this sounds interesting to you, or you just look forward to seeing my progress, I'll have links in the description to various social medias that you can follow me on. Regardless, I hope you have a good rest of the day. Ciao!